and thank you. My name is Steve Kirk. I'm with Planning Services, and I have signed a speaker's card. This is a county-initiated rezone petition that's necessary to allow the expansion of the existing trap and skeet facility located on Knights Trail Park. With me today is Marty Black, representing the Sarasota Trap and Skeet Incorporated, the lessee and operator of the trap and skeet facility, and he will follow me with a presentation on the proposed use. I have provided to the clerk additional correspondence that we've received, approximately 70 emails since your board packet was put together. The subject property is approximately 43 acres in size and is located on the north side of Rustic Road, and it's on the north end of Knights Trail Park. The property is part of and at the southern end of the 6,000-acre Pinelands Reserve. That is the property that the county purchased in 1985 for the construction of the county landfill. Of the Pinelands Reserve, approximately 550 acres is occupied by the landfill operation, and the balance is used for environmental mitigation of the construction of the landfill and to provide buffering to adjacent lands. The subject property, shown here in green, is zoned primarily government use. That portion of the site along Cowpen Slough is zoned open use conservation, and a small area to the west is zoned open use rural. The adjoining property to the northwest is zoned OUR and OUC, and all other properties surrounding is zoned GU. The Knights Trail Park and the existing trap and skeet facility is to the south, and Cowpen Slough is to the northwest. The aerial shows that the property is vacant and undeveloped, as is most of the surrounding property. Visible in the aerial is the existing trap and skeet facility located here, and also the county's shooting range, which is located here. This slide shows the county's future land use plan map and the subject property crosshatched in black. The site is primarily designated major government uses, and the portion along Cowpen Slough is designated public conservation preservation, and a small portion to the east is designated rural. The land use designations correspond to the existing zoning districts. This is the development concept plan, and the slide shows outlined in red the area under consideration for this rezoning. The existing trap and skeet facility is located here, immediately to the south, and here again is the county's gun range. The subject property is proposed to be used for sporting clay courses. These courses consist primarily of portable or movable shooting stations and traps or clay launching machines. The site was identified as the most appropriate location for the expansion of the existing trap and skeet facility. Other improvements proposed include a bathroom facility and a golf cart path that would loop the property. The proposed use is permitted in GU zoning. However, the ordinance that adopted the GU zoning for this property in 1991 as part of the rezoning for the landfill, the adopting ordinance has a condition that requires that a rezoning be processed to allow any use that's not indicated on the development concept plan that was adopted at that time. In addition, for the portions that are zoned OUC and OUR, the proposed use is not permitted, and therefore the change to GU is necessary. The staff has one recommended stipulation that would limit the use of the property to outdoor recreation in parks and open areas as defined in the zoning ordinance. And this concludes my presentation. I can answer questions, or you can hear from Marty to talk about the proposed use.
focus on that for a moment. So in an evaluation at the beginning of the, so when you commenced the expansion here, your other sites that you evaluated, were they in this general area?
Yes, and if I could get the Elmo, I can actually pull up some of the areas and explain maybe why this area is more appropriate from an environmental perspective.
Terrific.
So the area in here, and this is actually a topographic aerial imagery. You'll see here on the right, these are the existing pistol and rifle range, and then the county sheriff's facilities. You have the trap and skeet facilities in this area here, and effectively Knight's Trail covers this area. One of the areas that was potentially examined to stay in the park and not require rezoning was to the south in the area where the existing archery is. Let me move this. But you can see that this area is wetter, has a more dense vegetation, effectively is more of a hammock component. So while it's within the park and would not have required a rezoning, it would have had the potential to have environmental impacts that were not determined to be appropriate. This is actually in an area here where you have the existing archery components. So to place a course in here, while it would have been beautiful from the tree perspective, would have made it more difficult from a reclamation and monitoring from an environmental perspective of the shooting sports.
It's closer to the residents or to the south as well?
Yep, it's also closer to those residential areas from that perspective. So if you look at this area, obviously placing it in an area where you have the existing pistol and rifle range, there's some constraints from a safety perspective. That's why the site, if you will, migrated to the adjoining area to the north. The Solid Waste Department determined it was not necessary from their management components, and then led to this analysis of is this an appropriate site to bring forth this rezoning. Effectively, you would have access from the existing sporting clays cost, which is off the map here, through this area and then around this area here. I do want to point out you've got a series of wetland components, and obviously we're avoiding any of that in the proposed rezoning area for the use.
Thank you.
Commissioners, my name is John O'Miller, and I have no problem with sporting clays. I had a 20-gauge shotgun before I had a two-wheel bicycle and enjoyed shooting clay pigeons with my father. That's not the issue here today. I need to apologize. I forgot to bring a resume. I intended to bring one, but I just wanted to familiarize you with my background. And graduated with a degree in environmental studies from New College in '74. In 1975, Julie Morris and I formed an environmental consulting partnership called The Naturalists. In the late 70s, we were hired by Sarasota County to analyze the soils along the Myakka River. We were the people that wrote the habitat descriptions that appear in your comprehensive plan. We worked twice for the county to map all the habitats in Sarasota County. I've received a Lifetime Achievement Award from Sarasota County for my work on conservation. I've been involved in the acquisition and permitting of the Pinelands Reserve. I have a master's degree from the Florida Studies program at USF. I've served as a director of environmental studies at New College, and your predecessor commissions have appointed me to 7 or 8 county advisory boards dealing with the environment. So I'm here to tell you that I'm going to be providing competent and substantial evidence related to this issue. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding. It doesn't matter what % of the land is involved. It doesn't matter how many Olympic athletes have lived in Sarasota. What matters is whether this proposal is congruent with the adopted policies of Sarasota County. If you look at the first of the sheets I handed out today, if you go to page 339 of your adopted comprehensive plan recreation element, it clearly states that the Pinelands Reserve is a public conservation land. This is a document that was updated in August. If you go online, it says updated August 28th, I believe. And the last sentence in that section dealing with public conservation lands says county-owned conservation lands will be managed in accordance with the Land Management Master Plan. Now, if you go to your duly adopted Land Management Master Plan, on page 49, it says recreational uses implemented on the Pinelands Reserve and T. Mabry Carlton Jr. Memorial Reserve shall be limited to activities which are ecologically benign, non-consumptive, and resource-based. And also, at the bottom, you'll see your Parks Policy 1.1.5 on page 338 also addresses conservation lands and says recreational uses implemented within natural area parks and conservation lands shall be limited to activities which are ecologically benign, non-consumptive, and resource-based. Now let's go to the next page that talks a little bit about ecologically benign. Ecologically benign is a term of Sarasota County. It has nothing to do with DEP, has nothing to do with EPA, RCRA, the federal government, or anything else. This is a standard that Sarasota County adopted to apply to the Carlton Reserve and the Pinelands Reserve, and later expanded to all of the parks, natural area parks, and conservation lands. And if I have this excerpt from the Florida Bar Journal that deals with environmental stewardship on Florida shooting ranges, and they list a number of things that would be used to mitigate the effects of shooting. So one of them is amending the soils by application of lime. That is not ecologically benign. Your definition of ecologically benign says it has to have a net effect that is neutral or positive. You have flatwood soils with flatwood habitat. These are acidic soils. And this is, I think, contrary to the early testimony. Acidic soils have a lower pH, and when you add lime, you're going to neutralize it. So you're changing the habitat. That is not ecologically neutral. It talks about the construction of berms, backstops, and traps. That's not being proposed for sporting clays, but that's not ecologically benign. And it talks about regular mowing. Now, you've just been told about bringing in large equipment to scrape 2 to 3 inches of the topsoil off, and planting of grasses and seeding the area. That is not ecologically benign. That's not what we were told is going to be happening. So the strategies that may be appropriate on the Knights Trail Park or any other shooting range in the state, that's fine, but they do not meet the test that Sarasota County has adopted, which is a test of being ecologically benign. If you go to the next page, in March of last year, County Administrator Harmer announced that the natural resources wasn't going to be standalone. It was going to be split up. The regulatory was going to go to, I got 17 seconds. Well, the point is, this land did not move along with natural resources. The natural resources was fused in with the parks and recreation people, but this land didn't make the jump. And so we have that you have the Carlton Reserve, which made it, but the Pinelands did not. So figure 2.3 is an error, and all your other documents support the fact that this parcel is supposed to be protected, and the test is being ecologically benign. I'm sorry I ran over. I'd be happy to answer questions now or later.
Commissioner Robinson.
Mr. Miller, I read in the packet that Park weighed in on this. It's my understanding.
Yes.
Are you the chair of the Park Board?
I am.
Or were you the chair when this?
I was at the beginning of the meeting, and I think I was, yes, during the meeting.
All right. Just to understand, and I also read some of your backup that you had previously submitted, which I don't get a chance to talk to you about ahead of time.
I understand.
This is my only opportunity to ask you questions.
I understand.
So, one of the issues you objected to was the lack of notice to this, and I polled the. I asked staff ahead of time and had it polled to see what was mailed out, and I see there was a map of the property polled on the item, and I'll hand this to the clerk in a few minutes, and it also indicated where the meeting was and where the subject property was, and it said, it indicated it was changing the uses from government use, open use conservation, and open use rural to government use to allow the expansion, and it laid out what was going on. Your concern was the lack of label of Pineland Reserve on that. Was that correct?
Yes, exactly. It was labeled the subject property, so Pinelands Reserve was never mentioned. And
Okay,
if you finish that sentence, it says to allow the expansion of the existing Sarasota trap, skeet, and sporting clays facility currently located on Knights Trail Park. Well, depending on how you parse that sentence, you could either conclude that the expansion was currently on Knights Trail Park or whatever.
I get your concern.
Okay.
I understand your concern. It's
Yes.
a public notice concern that you had for this, right?
Yes, and
All
also
right.
in the materials that were circulated, it said that it was a Knights Trail Park rezoning when it's actually a Pinelands Reserve rezoning.
I understand. So were you the one to add this to the Park Board agenda, this item? Did you request this to be added?
I don't believe so, but Carolyn Brown is here. There were two presentations, and I think it was coming up on the agenda. Mr. Kirk was there to answer questions, and that's how we got engaged with discussing it.
So you don't know how it got added to the agenda?
I don't have the agenda in front of me.
Okay, I have a copy of the agenda. I
Okay.
just wanted to find out how it got on there, if you did it or if staff did it, if you requested it or if staff.
That's a good question, and
Okay.
I can't answer that standing
And
here.
I'll hand this to the clerk as well. It was labeled as item 5, planning development, 35 minutes, presentation discussion, no action required. Item A, Night Trail Park rezone, Steve Kirk. Item B, RV camping at Night Trail Park, Steve Kirk. So
You're correct. There were two issues. One, there was a sort of a workshop prior to the meeting dealing with the RV, and then it also came up in the meeting itself.
So based upon do you remember who added it to the agenda? Was it staff or you?
You know, I talked with Carolyn and staff prior to the meeting to discuss the agenda, and I don't recall
Okay, that's
where
fair.
it came from.
I noticed, because I noticed I asked staff, and I got a copy of draft minutes for this.
Yes.
And I noticed that in this, it's listed it's listed in here that there was a motion made on this item after that.
Yes, I passed the gavel so that I could make a motion.
Okay. Did you, I assume you saw this before the meeting, this agenda item, this agenda?
I was aware that the sporting clays was being proposed to move to Pinelands Reserve prior to the meeting,
No, I'm
yes.
talking about it being on your agenda. Did you see it on your agenda beforehand? Did you see the agenda? Did you get a copy of the agenda as
I'm
chair?
sure- Yes, I did.
All right, so did you ask that any of the folks who got the 514 postcards on this be notified that this was going to be on your agenda?
No, I don't, and I believe it was over 700 addresses, but no.
What about any of the workshop attendees? Did you request that they be noticed that this was going to be on your agenda?
I don't think we've ever done such a thing, so no.
Okay. It's a quasi-judicial matter, as you know, you're well versed in this. So did anybody have any concern at the time of taking this vote that there was nobody there to record it and that no interested members of the public would express interest earlier, those with the hundreds of emails, those who received the postcards, those who attended the workshop? Did anybody express a concern that none of those people were put on notice that you were all going to be taking action on this?
Well, I don't know how the agendas are circulated in advance, but it was duly advertised and that there was a record
It says
made
no
of the
action
meeting.
required. It says discussion. It doesn't say that there's a pending motion on it. So I'm trying to find out, since we have
Right. So I tried to get clarification from Carolyn Brown in a previous discussion about why some of these agenda items say no action required, and whether the no action required prohibited us from taking action or merely was a cue to the chair and the group that they didn't have to take action. My understanding of that conversation was that we are not prohibited from taking action.
I understand that, but you're concerned about public notice with the map. I'm just curious if anybody had the same concern with taking action on an item without interested parties being there.
I'm not aware of anyone expressing concern about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Caradzullo.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, you had indicated that you were instrumental in drafting the language that occurs in the land management master plan.
No, my
or
wife
the
and I
other-
drafted the descriptions of the habitats that appear in the
okay.
comprehensive plan.
So you had nothing to do with the actual drafting of the language ecologically benign.
As a matter of fact, when the county was in the process of putting to referendum the acquisition of the Carlton Reserve, which was then called the MacArthur Tract, I worked with Mabry Carlton and a number of other citizens to try and create a balance between the utilities used for the well field development with the protection of the remaining of the property. There was a concern that people would want to use ATVs or have other intense recreational uses on the site. So at that time, we came up with this language, ecologically benign, resource-based, and non-consumptive. That was applied to the Carlton Reserve, and then later the exact same language was transferred or moved laterally to the Pinelands Reserve. And I can't say for sure if I drafted that, but I was clearly involved in adopting, in agreeing to that language as constraining the Carlton Reserve.
So is it your position that ecologically benign is, you're basically saying that Sarasota County, we have our own definition of ecologically benign?
Yes, and you do have your own definition. It appears in the definition section of your recreation element. And I don't believe the state of Florida, if somebody else has a definition of ecologically benign, that's separate and distinct from what the county's put in its documents.
Thank you.
Anything else? Andre?
Thanks. It's pronounced Melee, as if it had two E's on the end of it. My name's Andy Melee. I'm a veteran, a Vietnam veteran. I have a BA in Environmental Studies, a master's degree in Environmental Science. I'm author of a book called Polluting for Pleasure that came out by Norton in 1993, and it's why everybody out there on the bays right now gets to drive a four-stroke engine, and there's no more two-stroke smoke drifting over the waters. That was me. I'm currently the Suncoast Waterkeeper, affiliated with the 400-strong Waterkeeper Alliance, and I'm a former executive director of a 20,000-person regional environmental group up in the Hudson Valley of New York State. I hope to provide, competent and credible testimony on this matter. The property is a conservation land site. That's shown in your comp plan. I think Mr. Miller did a pretty good job of enumerating everything. Conservation lands are binding on charter counties except by formal amendment, so you're staring down the barrel of a formal amendment. Comp plan lists the Pine Lands Reserve as conservation lands. Activities on conservation lands are passive, ecologically benign, and resource-based. And again, this lovely home rule state, your definitions get to trump the state, as long as they're more stringent, I believe. The comp plan defines those terms on pages 3-6, 7, and 8. The comp plan lists activities for conservation lands as passive and ecologically benign. At no point in the presentations that came before was there any clear statement of need. There were no statistics presented that I heard indicating rampant growth of usage of the facilities, anything that would push the county to essentially take and develop public conservation lands for these sorts of purposes. The proposal is not consistent with the intent, goals, and so on of a comprehensive plan. The proposed change will not be compatible with existing land use patterns and designated future land use. There are no substantial reasons why property cannot be used in accord with existing zoning as appropriate for existing zoning. And it's not impossible to find alternative sites. The proposed change will have adverse impacts on adjacent areas, as I think we just heard. With that in mind, lead shot, if lead shot's just sitting out in the air, it oxidizes. When it oxidizes, it becomes water soluble. There will be lead runoff. And I appreciate their diligence with regard to best management practices. Sounds like a very well-run operation. I just don't think this is the right place to expand it, and I'm not sure that the need to expand has been established. There are three sources of lead in humans: paint, dust and soil, and drinking water. Two of those will be present at the site: drinking water, groundwater, and of course dust and soil. In its water-soluble state, lead attaches to molecules in stormwater and migrates into both groundwater and surface waters used for drinking. I'm sure they've addressed a lot of this in the best management practices. I'm not familiar with them, I regret, but I do want to point this out. The clay pigeons, the targets, are not clay. They're made of pitch, petroleum pitch, and coal tar, both of which are quite toxic. They contain high loads of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, ironically the same material that ultimately led to the curtailment of two-stroke outboard motors on boats, because their smoke was full of PAHs. Very high level. I read an example of some UK English oilseed farmers filing injunctions against farmers shooting distributing skeet over their oilseed fields. Very high levels of PAH in the oilseed resulted in thousands of tons of the agricultural product being incinerated as hazardous waste. Gun magazine blogs say that the best way to get rid of the shattered targets is crush them with your boots or run over them with your ATV until they are reduced to grit. I mean, that stuff, feral pigs apparently will snack on these things occasionally, and apparently they die a very painful death from it. It's something to be talked about. Noise. The sound of large caliber, large big bore weapons is going to resonate throughout the area. There will be birds that will no longer be able to nest in the area. There will be mammals that will no longer be able to exist or nest in the area. And I'd love to keep talking, but we're concerned about the precedent this sets for the taking of public conservation lands. And I thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to come back.
I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, can we have a break?
Good morning.
And I might need Mr. Kirk's assistance to put up the aerial of it, which is for us on page 815. It was the 2013 aerial or something close to it, if you will.
For the record, Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Matt Osterhout. I'm the Environmental Protection Manager for Sarasota County in our Planning and Development Services Department, and I will be signing a speaker's card momentarily.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, I have some questions. There were some things raised in the packet that I need to address, and some things that were raised in testimony that I would like to address. So let me start with the items in I received some emails, and there were some items in the packet from people supplying supplemental information about gopher tortoises, and that there's a gopher tortoise area located nearby this. And so maybe the area of that gopher tortoise where there, could you point to, well, actually you can't point to it. Well, there you go.
I have a pointer.
Yeah.
So you can see a square shape here that I'm outlining with the mouse.
Okay.
That is on private property, and that is a gopher tortoise bank for that property owner.
Okay, and so can you outline the current, maybe Mr. Kirk might have to help you on the current trap skeet and sporting clay area?
It's located right here.
Okay, and then the proposed area is in the yellow, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Oates, can you help me with, I am not a gopher tortoise expert. Can you tell me what kind of habitat, in terms of description of, if you were describing it to my first grader, what kind of habitat would you describe that a gopher tortoise likes?
Sure. So when you're talking about Florida native habitat areas, you're not going to be talking about wet environments for gopher tortoises. They're going to be liking that higher, drier, sandy soils where they can create that burrow. So if you can think of a place like Oscar Shear State Park, you're obviously going to get a healthy amount of gopher tortoises in that area. Scrub habitats, and they do venture into flatwoods. This is one of the flatwood areas. But in particular, when you talk about gopher tortoise, one thing to highlight is that there are state regulations about gopher tortoise conservation, and they do outline when to protect, how to protect, and offer up the option to relocate if impacts must occur to the burrows. They do not authorize takings anymore. Several years ago, the state regulations did authorize private property owners as well as local governments in doing their work to bury them, which was unfortunate, but that rule has since been changed. So even though we did not highlight any gopher tortoise burrows during our inspection out there, if we do find any out there as this project unfolds into the future, there are standards that are there to ensure that they are relocated properly onto either the adjacent county lands or other facilities that can accept those or receive those tortoises.
And you didn't see any listed species in this area, is that correct?
Not during our site inspections, no.
Okay, let me go back to that in a second. Let me go back to the gopher tortoise for a second. Let's talk about the gopher tortoise. What kind of feet do they have? Do they when you talk about a gopher tortoise, what do they use their feet for, and what do they look like?
Describe them as rather bulky and club-like.
Okay, so do they have web feet?
No, they're not going to be aquatic.
They're not aquatic.
Yes, they're not like a turtle. They're a tortoise, a land tortoise.
So when you find a gopher tortoise, should you put it in water?
No, we do not recommend it.
Okay. Can you, I noticed that in between the gopher tortoise area and the trap skeet and sporting clay area, that there appears to be a dark line there. Can you tell me what that dark line is?
Sure, that is the Cowpen Slough.
Okay, so that's water.
Yes.
So there's a concern about this being the connectivity for gopher tortoises. From what you've described, with their not liking water, that's a natural. They already have a natural barrier there in Cowpen Slough.
Yes, we do not expect that any tortoises on this area will be coming onto that property.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
There's no conveyance at that area. You do have gopher tortoises enjoying berms quite a lot. Anybody who's really taken a look around some of our community elements, you see elevated berms. They tend to like that higher, drier area where they can do that. So as we proceed further, again, as any project unfolds here, we will be further evaluating to ensure that if there are any berms like that along Cowpen Slough that do have gopher tortoise burrows, we can address them accordingly, consistent with state law.
Okay. Let me ask about wildlife corridors, and that issue's been brought up. First, to the south of the highlighted area, part of the area along Cowpen Slough already is leased to the trap skeet and sporting clay group currently now. And so this is extending it along along the slough going north a bit. So tell me about wildlife corridors in this area.
As mentioned earlier, we don't have a map that describes exact wildlife corridors in Sarasota County, but we do have good information in our comprehensive plan that speak to regional corridor networks. You have documents like 2050 that showcase where your greenways are. And we even have maps in there about high ecological value. And the area of high ecological value in Sarasota County is actually located to the north of Cowpen Slough in this area, rather to the south. This area is not highlighted as one of those areas of high ecological value. Now, when we're talking about wildlife, regardless of what action the county takes today, either way, all activities on that property must ensure compliance with all levels of state and federal regulations. So whether or not there was a animal that required protection when we did our inspection, if it was not there, but it is there 5 months from now, it's going to have to be addressed when it is identified. So I would just want to make sure that that's clear, that even though we didn't observe listed species during our site inspections, they could occupy that property at some future date, and then they would have to be compliant with the state and federal regulations. But again, we're not familiar with any indigo snakes on the property. We're not familiar with any scrub jays using the property. We're not familiar with any bald eagle nests on that property. And so therefore, we found it that at this time, this area does not have significant wildlife occupation on that property.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Caradula.
Yeah, Matt, tell me, this was a question for you or Carolyn regarding the water monitoring, and that goes on, you said that there are 2 wells that are actually on the rifle and pistol range?
Sure. I'm going to pass it over to
Okay.
Carolyn or possibly somebody else that's going to assist. I am familiar with past water quality sampling that's been done in some monitoring wells, but I'd like to call up Carolyn to provide some more information about that.
With respect to the future land use map, the actual current shooting operation is on conservation land or land that's marked for the future land use for conservation, correct?
This is the monitor is the future land use
Yeah.
plan map.
So-
And the rezone area, the gray area is
Right, that's government use. What I'm saying is the existing operation right now is on land that is future land use conservation land.
yes, sir.
Okay. And explain to me, with respect to the reason why you need a rezone, and maybe Mr. Roddy can tell me this, is because the ordinance that was passed with respect to the Pinelands Preserve is sort of deals with use. It's use that's specific to a geographic line as opposed to what the current zoning of the property is. Not the green space there, but the gray government use zoning.
excuse me, Commissioner, the prior rezone, when the landfill was, the land was acquired for the landfill, and subsequently in the amendment in 1998, specified that only the uses shown on the development concept plan at that time could occur on the property. So this use obviously was not shown on the development concept plan in 1991 or in 1998. The 98 revision brought in the recreational flyers, some amendments to the site plan, but it showed the recreational flyers, which was not a use on that very large property, so they had to amend the rezone for that to add the recreational flyers. And this is another such rezone that will rezone this property to provide for this use on the site.
Move to adopt ordinance. Sorry, I turned it off. Move to adopt ordinance number 2015-002, approving rezone petition number 14-34 for property located west of Knights Trail Road and north of Rustic Road from OUR, OUC, and GU with stipulations to GU with amended stipulations.
Is there a second?
I will.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Robinson and seconded by Commissioner Caragiolo to adopt the ordinance 2015-002. Commissioner Robinson, any discussion?
Yeah, this is the existing facility is tremendous. I've used it many times. While not a current member of the club, they've been nothing but kind, and everybody who I've seen walk through their door, they welcome with open arms, and really make them feel like they're already a fabric of the community. And when you go through the parking lot, especially during season, it's like looking through the 50 states, because you will find plates from as far as Washington in that parking lot. It's just amazing, and sometimes it's even hard to find a spot.
Seconder?
Yeah, Commissioner Robinson hit on several of the same points. Having been doing this a couple of years, one of the things I try to explain to people is the difference between dealing with a legislative issue and a quasi-judicial issue. I will tell you, and I am a user of the facility, a supporter of the facility, but in the last couple of weeks I've had some real concerns regarding how this was playing out with respect to the quasi-judicial part of this. I don't have those concerns anymore because for a lot of the same reasons that Commissioner Robinson identified, I think that if we've all decided for the most part that it's a good community effort or a good community benefit to expand this facility, then exactly the point is you mitigate the impact by keeping things very compact.
Commissioner Mayo?
I'm going to echo what the previous two commissioners said, but I'm going to take just a few seconds to touch on some other points which are important to me and important to everyone. There were 5 speakers who spoke in opposition to this, and the way they oppose this, their style, is what we really need to see more of. There was no yelling, no screaming, no red-faced name-calling, and I compliment them on that. Ironically, I think probably 16 years ago, my first Planning Commission meeting, Maynard Hiss spoke at, so I remember him well. I know Joan O'Miller very well. For some reason, Mr. Wynn looks very, very familiar to me. It may be that he lives just slightly, he and his wife live just slightly closer to the range than I do. In the opposite direction, I'm on the other side of Cowpen Slough. This is a great facility. The range officers from the range used to eat at my restaurant, and they took my youngest, probably at 10 years old, and took him to the range and explained all about gun safety, and I just stood way in the background. It's an important thing for young people to see. Some may disagree with this, but this is another element of our sports tourism. I actually, I assume everyone got it, an email from someone who said they deliberately moved to Sarasota because of these facilities. So I appreciate the way everyone handled themselves, and I also appreciate this facility. I'm not a member of your club. Probably a good idea because I would have been uncomfortable voting on this, but I have been to the range many, many, many times with my family and with my guests.
If there are no other comments, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Chair votes aye. Motion carries unanimously.